Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to dive into the big Apple hardware announcements and the continued saga with Elon over his bid to purchase Twitter. Now, let's get into it. Good morning, D. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I think this Apple announcement is really interesting, and I was actually I guess I should have expected it, but Elon Musk Twitter story has just gone in strange new directions that I didn't think were going to happen.
I know this is going to be like a mini series. Watch, it's going to end
Oh
up being
yeah,
some sort of show on HBO Max or something.
yeah, it's totally going to be a TV show. There's I expected him to start looking for a way out and stuff, but the stuff that has happened recently has been just getting crazy.
I also have some theories on that too. We'll talk about that as the wrap up today. We have these two topics, but let's talk about something more positive and interesting, which is Apple announces new hardware. So when you read about this and watched some of the videos and stuff, what were some of the things that popped into mind?
Well, the first thing I heard was Apple M2, so the new processing chip, which is really interesting to me. The M1 performed very well. It got eventually outclassed by Intel's newer processors, the 12th gens,
Uh
but
huh.
that happens. You kind of get leapfrog. But we have essentially a new processor designer and manufacturer jumping into the fray, which is going to make everything advance more quickly. And I don't know that the Intel 12 series would have been as aggressively innovative. Maybe innovative is not the word, but progressive at least as far as new performance if it didn't have the Apple M1 there to push it along.
So what do you think that they're actually preparing for? Because I've had this conversation with quite a few people. These processors are getting smaller, they're getting faster, they're having absolute phenomenal performance. But if you looked at it from a roadmap perspective, what are they anticipating is coming down the line that they need to get all of these processors basically up to, no pun intended, speed in order to be able to handle?
Uh, I don't think that there. I actually don't think there is anything. I think they looked at it and said, "Hey, we're losing some revenue here to Intel or Qualcomm and these other chip makers," and they wanted to take it completely vertical. I don't really see a big. I know somebody's going to say self-driving cars and stuff like that, but Apple's honestly, without being too critical, their software is not that good, to be honest. Historically,
Well,
it
I don't
hasn't
know.
been.
I mean, I like their software. It definitely has its
Sure. Do
issues at
you
times or
use do
whatever,
you use
but
Apple Maps exclusively?
yeah. So I mean, I do like it, but I also think there's always been two camps. I used to be PC, and now I'm Mac, and then I use some PC stuff, with my son's school. But for
Hmm.
the most part, well, let me put it this way: for the most part, everyone has it dialed in pretty well. Meaning, like all of these machines, whether it be Mac with its new M2 or an Intel processor inside of a Windows machine, they're all good. They're really good because when
Hmm.
PCs first came out, they were really bad. And so, like, I'm very happy with the way everything is. But what I was getting at with that question is that I actually think that they might be prepping for the glasses and the things that they've been talking about, more of the augmented reality stuff,
Mm.
is having the processors prepared and ready for potentially new innovations that are going to unfold over the next 5 years. Because I mean, there's been a lot of rumors and talks about augmented reality and how everyone's trying to get them to not be connected to the machines, right? But what if there is a way to do both, right? You have something on your glasses, or you have some processing on your glasses that allows you to do a lot of things in the real world, but then also you can connect them to your machine, which has this amazing processor in it, and you can do even more exciting things that we can't even think of right now. I feel like if you're looking at it from a strategy perspective at Apple, and you're like, hey, we got to keep bumping up all of these things. We also bump them all up with the idea that new technology is going to come in and everything's got to work really well. So that's kind of the feeling I got.
I think it's interesting. I don't know how much an M2 specifically would play into kind of a head mount display, kind of VR, AR, or MR.
Uh huh.
And I don't know how much, from what I understand, the M2 is pretty like CPU forward.
Uh-huh.
I think it does have like an onboard GPU from what I understand, but like anybody who's doing heavy duty kind of 3D rendering will tend to need a discrete GPU. We'll see when it gets to benchmarks. They make all these claims, and we'll see what the benchmarks look like. Mostly, they seem like they're optimized for kind of creator workflows or productivity workflows. So, like processing like an Adobe video render or something like that, or in
Yeah.
something like Premiere or Photoshop or some one of these kind of work processors. So that's very CPU heavy, not a lot of GPU requirements. You would a nice GPU would probably be helpful for like CAD rendering and speeding that up. But like the main, I feel like where you're going to start seeing AR VR technologies come from are from companies and technologies that service gaming,
Hmm.
because it has similar requirements with the 3D rendering.
Yeah. That's true. Like they have to match those properly. You can't release a game with all these capabilities if a percentage of the market doesn't even have the capability to play it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of advancements. I think that Unreal Engine 5 might be helpful with kind of VR, AR, MR, so on. And we're starting to see some use cases really pop up. The Google announcement with the live translation with
Yep.
subtitles on the real world was really compelling. We'll see if Apple follows suit. I would expect them to, at least for that kind of use case. But I would imagine they would need a different chip than the M2 in order to really get it into like a pair of glasses.
Yeah. And they were able to integrate the M2 into the new MacBook Air as well, right?
Yeah, I had an interesting reaction to this because, well, my recent experience has been all right. I've had an Ultrabook for a few years, and then I still have the Ultrabook and I still use it for things. But I went back to a full fledged laptop, an actual gaming laptop with a NVIDIA RTX GPU inside. And I immediately thought to myself, I can't really see myself going back to an Ultrabook. If I do want something that's more mobile like that, maybe I'll get a tablet or something.
Hmm.
But are Ultrabooks still a thing, or are people looking, at least for mainstream, or would Mac consumers be better off looking at a MacBook Pro?
You know, good question for someone like me because I am both on the go and I try to do a ton of head down work at the office, right? And
Hmm.
so I thought about this because the new MacBook Air gets the M2, but it also gets all the ports that the MacBook Pro has. I
Hmm.
think for the most part, I think it might have one less, but we should double check that. Um, I still think if I'm only going to buy one machine, though, I think I would get a MacBook Pro.
Right.
So I believe the MacBook Air is great if you're like, let's say you're going to buy a fleet of them for like your sales team or something, and they're kind of
Hmm.
on the go all the time. They need a few ports on it, but they need something really light because they travel a lot. That seems like it would make more sense. But for someone like me who like travels literally to and from an office or the backyard, or you and I are going to a coffee shop or something like that, I would just bring my MacBook Pro with me. So my
Yeah.
use case basically drives me to say, okay, my next upgrade is going to be the MacBook Pro.
Yeah, it is kind of like in this wedge space where, like, you imagine, like, I mean, it's somebody who is involved in, like, a tech industry thing, or who is in STEM or in potentially gaming. I know nobody really thinks of a Mac for gaming, but it does exist.
Yeah.
They're going to be looking more at a MacBook Pro. Maybe somebody who's a little bit older, or somebody who's like traveling a lot. But at that point, you're also kind of running up against the tablets, especially the higher end tablets with the keyboard attachment, which is going to be lighter and probably going to be able to do the same things. I struggle a little bit to think about, in that wedge space, what would be the differentiator between getting that would say, all right, we'll get a Mac Air instead of like an iPad
Yeah,
Pro.
I don't know. It wouldn't work great for me. I mean, it would be a functional machine and that kind of stuff, but
Mhm.
like I still would go toward the Pro. So maybe it's a cost thing too. Like, if someone's looking at it and they're like, "Well, I want the Air, but it doesn't have the ports because the Air is cheaper." Then you would say, "Okay, well now the Air has the ports in it, so I can just get the Air."
Mhm.
right? That's
But
one
yeah,
use case right there.
I feel like if you're gonna get a single device that's gonna be your daily driver, you'd probably look at the MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a secondary device, if you have a MacBook Pro and you're looking at a secondary device that can fill in for like if you travel or out of the office
Hmm.
or just don't want to bring a laptop and you want to go like sit outside and watch some YouTube videos or something, it's probably going to be an iPad Pro. And it's kind of in this in between space where it might be kind of niche, but like I wonder about ultrabooks as a category.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. For a while, if you remember, like what was that, 2000, let's say 8 to 11 or something, it was all about
Hmm.
that category, right?
Oh yeah,
Everyone wanted to have like the Ultrabook. And then, there was the Lenovo Yoga and like all this type of stuff.
hmm,
And then they just disappeared. It was like
yeah.
everyone
I
stopped
mean,
talking about it.
me and myself, I was like, okay, I've had an ultrabook for a couple of years now, and I'm like champing at the bit to get something that can actually do more things. Like it's fine for doing what it does. I still use it sometimes for surfing the net and doing some simple stuff, but like it kind of feels like a little baby machine to some
Yeah.
extent, and I wanted something a little bit more full featured.
Yeah, and I'll also tell you too, like my mom uses the iPad, and I was thinking about this too. I was like, would she want just like a MacBook Air? And it's like, no, she doesn't because she wants that like integrated screen and all kind of
Mhm.
thing that she can just drop into her purse.
Yeah, it's better optimized for mobile use. And you can get the add-on keyboards and the Apple Pencil and stuff, and they're great.
Yeah.
So don't, I don't know. I don't know about just a question I have. I don't know the answer, but like I do wonder about maybe it's just me because I am into gaming. I am into trying to do more with. I am using this thing for work, and I am in kind of the tech industry. But I do wonder about like, all right, well, what's the wedge in which the ultrabooks fit in at this point?
Well,
Especially because
there
tablets
is.
have gotten so good.
Yeah, So for a while, I was a little bit down on tablets because I was just
Hmm.
like, why would I use a tablet, right? Like, there's no value. I just grab my laptop and open it up.
Hmm.
But then, as they've gotten better and better and better, I'm like, I can understand how at the end of the day, you just want to shut down your machine that has all of your like work on it, your work, your job,
Hmm.
and have this like tablet sitting out there that you can look things up. It's not connected to your email. You can just, I mean, you can connect it to your email, but like just separate it. And it was a friend that actually told me, he says, when I pick up my tablet in the evening when I'm goofing off, hanging out, he said, I feel very relaxed. He's like, but if I go and pick up my machine and I flip it open,
Hmm.
I know that Slack's going to start clicking and like, you know what I mean? Like they're like
Yeah,
two
there's
different.
something about kind of the what the form factor evokes, right? Like the
Yeah.
act of like flipping it open and having the keyboard. Well, you have the keyboard so you can type, and you're probably typing because you're responding to work emails, no matter what your job is, or you're
Yeah.
on a Slack or something. That's typically what a keyboard is actually associated with these days, unless you're a gamer. So it's for anybody who kind of has that kind of office job kind of thing, like getting away from that and getting to a tablet, which has different form factor and different kind of psychological associations with it. That's completely different. And I think one of the reasons why things have changed is back when ultrabooks were like in their like heyday, or even
Hmm.
netbooks. Remember before that? Remember those? Uh, it was because tablets weren't great yet. Tablets at the time were like, why would I use this? I'll just have a smartphone. So I think all of that is really interesting, especially because number one, the iPads are great. They've really evolved, and I think they've kind of come into their own. And now Google's releasing their own in-house tablet, so it's kind of creeping into the space that ultrabooks used to fill.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, if I had to pick between buying an Ultrabook or a high end tablet, I would take the tablet right now.
Yeah,
So just
especially if
because
you
of my use
have
cases.
especially if you have a MacBook Pro or a gaming PC or laptop or something like that already
Yeah.
to be your
Well,
main
hey,
driver.
on that in that same vein, let's talk about iOS 16. Let's talk about software
Okay.
because that's what actually like blew my mind was all these really really cool upgrades and some of the things that they're doing with software right now. So,
Yeah.
you want to talk about some of the things that you saw that you liked?
So I'm going to be a little critical of Apple because they tend to bring out things that have been available on other platforms, other services, and act like they're like the biggest innovations in the world. But At the same time, iOS 16 had something really interesting to me that I haven't really seen anywhere else, at least not implemented in the way that they're doing it. So they are announcing lock screen widgets, which I have had on Android devices for a very long time. So
Yeah.
it's nice to see them implement that. It was kind of odd to me that they get a little obstinate about things that are clear advancements in the UX and they decide to kind of wait on it. This is
It's
what
the Apple
happened with
way,
like
D. It's the
NFC.
Apple way.
They were so stubborn about implementing NFC until they could figure out Apple Pay. But until you could figure out a service that Apple can directly leverage, until they were able to do that, they didn't want to provide the capability to their users, which I find
Welcome
annoying.
to Silicon Valley. You know what I mean? Welcome to Apple.
That's not what Silicon. That's new Silicon Valley. Old Silicon Valley was like, all right, let's give the users the tools and see what they can come up with. But anyway,
Yeah.
so they're allowing you to edit or unsend messages like uh, using Messenger, which is what you've been able to do with Slack or Discord for a long time. It's a great feature. I use it all the time, especially because I'm kind of OCD about typos and stuff. So every now and then I'll like send out a message that has the wrong there or something, and if I
Hmm.
can't correct it, it's just going to mess with me for the whole day.
So
So
talk
I
to me.
love that out
Wait.
of Slack or Discord, and it's great that they implemented it into Messenger.
So pause there for a second, though. So tell me about this unsend messages because I was doing some research on it, and it said something like you can unsend a message up to like 30 minutes or something. So
Yeah,
are you? So does the message you send the message, and then because it's marked as one that could be unsend, it just sits in the mailbox for 30 minutes before they receive it?
no, it's just it's dynamic on their side too. So if you send something, if you like sent something to me and then found out like 10 minutes later, oh crap, that wasn't true. That was just a rumor that I heard.
Uh,
On Slack or Discord, you can go through and you would delete it, and it would delete on their client side too. So it would be up on their screen for like 20, 30 minutes. This is the way I assume that it works. I don't actually have any specific knowledge of how it's working in Messenger yet.
yeah.
But it just deletes. You can watch it. We can go into our Slack channel right now, and I can send you a message, and then I can delete it, and you can watch on your screen as it deletes. Kind of like a Google Docs, right?
Yes, but they still saw it though.
They might have seen it. So there's
Eh,
a disclaimer in the description that we can delete it, but it doesn't guarantee that the person you sent it to hasn't seen it.
Or taking a screenshot of it.
Yeah, and honestly, it's probably going to live in the metadata in the back end too. So if you're sending something and it gets subpoenaed, it's going to be there. They're going to be able to find it.
Yeah. I think where this comes from is the fact that like ultimately people want to edit their messages. And we've
Yeah,
always felt that with text messages and things like that in the past, like, oh man, I just sent that message. And like you said, there's a typo or you wanted to add something to it. Now you have to kind of rewrite and say, oops, and all this kind of stuff.
mhm.
It's actually just more efficient.
Yeah, and I hope that Twitter learns from this because come on, guys.
You know, at one point they said it was like a lot of work to add editing to their tweets. So make sure you really want it. And I was like, oh my God.
Maybe pay Discord to teach them how to do it. Then
Yeah.
maybe they can pay somebody else to do some pretty fundamental, easy. And Google can do it. Everybody else does it.
Well, I mean, ultimately, that's kind of why I think, you know, and we'll talk about Elon and Twitter and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
is that there's frustrations on many ends, but even from a user perspective, I think people have wanted a lot of additions and changes that just haven't happened in a
yeah.
long time. So,
It's
but
it's a,
anyways,
it's a bit of a UX measuring stick. If your user base, like your entire user base, has been asking for a very simple feature for literally over a decade, and it's not that hard. The technology's been figured out. It's kind of industry standard, but they're not doing it. It's tells you something about the perspective and the philosophy of the company.
exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing is like we talk about this all
Like
the
lock
time.
screen widgets.
We- yeah, exactly. Now we need to add widgets. Um, So this next one I wanted to mention because I need to get your thoughts on it because I have positive feelings and negative feelings about it. And I'm looking at the notes here, obviously, that you had dropped in because you were the one kind of like setting up this Apple announcement stuff. Is Apple Pay gets pay later, which I'm very familiar with that because of Affirm. So I've been kind of
Mhm.
tracking the company Affirm, and I've been looking at you know, the rise of people wanting to take a purchase and break it up into little pieces and pay over a period of time. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very different than a credit card, because these companies are basically saying, okay, you wanted to go buy this new table for $100. You can pay $25, let's say a week for the next 4 weeks, but there's no interest on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one part of me is like, okay, this is great. So people aren't paying interest on this stuff, so they don't have to use their credit card. That's number one. So this is kind of an attack on the credit card companies, really. I mean, coming from tech companies, really, it really is. It's a shot over the bow of like saying like, hey, we're
Sure.
going to do this different. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that it does allow you to have a little bit of breathing room when you're about to pay for something. Like I can imagine going into the bookstore in college. I mean, I know they don't do this as much now. Everything's probably online, but like when we were in college, we had to go buy a whole stack of books, right? And you go spend two, three, $400 on books, and we needed them, so you had to buy them. And none of us made a lot of money back then, so it would have been nice to say like, okay, you can buy this and you just pay it off over the course of the next semester, right? So there's like all these different scenarios where I could see value in that. Where I see an issue in general, and we'll see how this unfolds across a large population, and we're already seeing it with Affirm a little bit, is
Mm-hmm.
that people buy stuff that they can't afford because it feels affordable because you're chunking it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a problem with that because because me, I'm very like conservative with my money, is like, if I can't afford it, I really can't afford it, maybe I should be rethinking whether or not I should buy it. And this makes me not rethink it. This makes me go, I'm just going to get it. So
Yeah.
it's a psychology that's happening here. And even when you and I were chatting offline, you even said like, yeah, this makes you want to kind of just grab that thing that you want. Right. So how do you feel about this? Because I feel like this is such a big issue, and people aren't really talking about it as much as they should be.
Well, one of the reasons why this is possible. Now let's break down kind of the service and what it does. So this has been around for a long time. You used to be able
Yes.
to go to Sears and buy something expensive and pay like on a payment plan, or Walmart or whatever, the pay as you go plan or pay as you can plan.
You mean layaway?
Layaway, right? You have an item on layaway. Now, this is essentially the same thing. It's doing kind of what Shopify does, where now instead of you having to build your own kind of payment plan as a retailer, right? You imagine you're a relatively small retailer online. You have your own shop, like Chewy or something like that, or not. I guess they're not relatively small, but you're an e-commerce site and you're getting started, and you want to institute this because you can increase sales, and most of them will end up paying it off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a great service. It's been around for a while. It's more available now. One of the things that's a little bit different now is now you can go to like Klarna or Firm or one of these companies, and you can buy something and pay for like 48 months with zero interest. Now, the only reason why you can do that is because the prime rate is so low as set by the Fed, and that is going to be changing. So I think in the near future we're going to see interest rates bump up. And this happened to me recently, right? I'm looking at getting a new guitar, and guitars are expensive, and I'm like, okay, cool, do I want to pay this? And I usually agonize over purchases, partially because like, all right, well, I've got to find space for it, and space, if you're living in
Yep.
Silicon Valley, is always a premium because it's so expensive. During the process, I was like, oh, hey, I could make $15 payments on this thing for 48 months in order to pay it off.
Yeah.
Um, and it's zero interest, so why wouldn't I, even if I can pay it up front? Now, when you start saying, okay, now it's going to be 5% interest or 2% interest, now that changes the calculus, and you'll see less people using it. So the issues are twofold with it from kind of a macroeconomic standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
One is that you're changing the debt to savings ratio for a lot of families because they're taking on more debt. So if they have a drop in their earnings, they could get into a bad position. On the other side, the fact that so many people are doing this, because it's basically your in general creates additional monetary supply. So the fact that so many people are doing this right now is contributing probably heavily to inflation. So that's one of the reasons why the way to combat inflation is to increase the Fed rate, which then increases the interest that all of these lenders are providing, which decreases the amount of borrowing that's done. So you have like a hedge against inflation. So those are all things that happen. But at the same time, I think it's great that it exists. It should cost a little. It should cost something. It should cost some kind of interest at some point. I think it's good if it's implemented properly. I think it's good for the consumer. It can be good for the consumer. It can be good for the retailer. There's the middleman, like an Apple or a Klarna or a firm that can make a little bit of money, and everybody kind of wins. But if it's not carefully managed, then you can end up with some situations where we have now, where it's just contributing to the monetary supply and kind of like racking up debt for people.
Well, here's where, yeah, exactly. So the racking up debt thing is what I worry about the most. And I was thinking about this, and it's like what I heard is the way they're trying to structure this, and this stuff changes a lot because they adjust these things, excuse me, according to competitors and stuff. But the idea is, with at least some of these companies that you're talking about, is that if you're going to break up, let's say, $100 payment, it's not going to be any interest if you do it over the course of like 4 weeks. It's when we get
Mm-hmm.
into what you talked about, which is something that's like months out. So when you're saying like 12 months out or
Oh yeah,
24 months,
48 months, zero interest.
yeah, right. So you're basically delaying this debt for a really long time. So if you buy a ton of things, you're going to have basically long-term debt that is constantly sitting with you, assuming maybe that you didn't decide to just one day pay it off because you're like, well, why would I pay it off if I don't have to, right? I feel like
Mm-hmm.
you're going to create some pretty large banks out of this, meaning like a firm, Apple's basically going to become a bank, even though they are backed by, I believe Goldman Sachs is handling all the back end, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're putting Apple in the position of becoming a large bank entity. And you really are competing, and I was saying this earlier, with credit card companies, because right now, if you buy a guitar for $500 on your credit card, after month one, you're clearly going to be charged interest on it. But if these
Mm-hmm.
companies are like, oh, we won't do it for 5 months, well, suddenly everyone's going to use Apple Pay or I think it's called Klarna, right? Or Affirm or any of these
Mm-hmm.
others to do it because they're not having to pay interest, and it's going to force the credit card companies to reduce their interest payments. Because right now, a lot of people who would need this service in the larger population uses credit cards, and their interest rates are actually quite high.
Yes.
So this could be a really good competitor, but also long-term psychology is what I worry about. Because suddenly you look back and you go, oh, I look at my debt schedule, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I bought 15 or 16 things that I had to have, and I'm still paying them, and it's going to take me 2 years to
Mm-hmm.
pay them off. And this is not like layaway, because in layaway, you didn't get the product until it was paid for.
Yeah, which didn't. I never really got the idea behind layaway. Just like put money into a jar until you can afford it, right?
Well,
Or a separate
exactly,
account or
right?
whatever
So
you have to.
people would start layaway in June, and they
Mm-hmm.
would pay off until Christmas, and then all the stuff that they wanted to give their kids or whatever for Christmas was available to them, right? So basically it was a forced cookie jar to put your money in, right? Because people have a hard time, some maybe at home, like
Yeah,
putting the money away. Instead, when it's someone tells you owe them that money, you're willing to send it to them. This is like a version of it. So it
yeah.
has its goods, but it also has its potential issues.
Yeah, I thought that was bad for consumers. I think it would be better nowadays for like go into E-Trade and put money into a money market account until you have what you need to buy something. Then you're getting interest on it, as opposed to the company getting interest on it, and you, as a consumer, kind of being out on that.
Well, that rolls
Um,
that rolls all the way back to previous podcasts we've talked about, where it's like we're not even providing enough education to people to know to even do that. I mean, when you just said like go to E Trade, it's like okay, now you have to have an E Trade account, right? Your phone is in
yeah.
your phone is in your pocket, so you literally double click on that, right, the button on the right side of your iPhone, and instantly that product is at your house. You're not paying interest on it.
So what I would say about these, if you're a consumer and you're looking at this, there's a couple things to check on. One is take a look at the terms, the fine print, make sure that they can't increase interest on you after the fact. So they
100%.
can't come in and say, okay, well now you signed up for essentially a variable interest loan, so you got for 0%, but after the first year we're gonna raise it to 15%. So
Yeah.
double check that. The other thing is keep track of how much total debt you're racking up on these plans and make sure that they are well within your discretionary spending. And think about, if you were to, God forbid, lose your job or get injured or something and be unable to work, make sure that you either have an out where you can return the product and get out of your payments, or you can cover the payments easily with kind of a backup spending account.
Yeah, I was listening to the CEO of a firm on Bloomberg Business Week the other day. Max, I believe he's one of the PayPal mafia guys. But anyways,
Hmm.
he was talking about how if a customer cannot pay back that debt for what they purchased, that's on them. Meaning
Yep.
that there's a screening process, to basically validate that you have the credit or the availability to be able to pay back this $100 purchase over 4 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever you choose to do. And if they can't, that's on them. Meaning like that's their loss. That's a firm's loss,
Yes.
which tells
So,
me that they're screening everybody.
well, they've done the math to find out, how much can we put out and what they've probably looked at, like what channels, which retail channels are most likely to get paid off, and
True.
which ones are more associated with people defaulting. And they're probably choosing their retail outlets that they go with based on that.
Well,
And
I'll,
part of that
I'll
comes down to brand too.
yeah, and I'll say one last thing about this, and then we can move on to the next one because you can tell I'm very passionate about this. Is that, um, and it just sounds kind of crude, but if you're a responsible person, this will be one of the coolest tools available to you. If you're irresponsible with your money and your bills and things like that, for whatever reason, maybe it's out of your control, and that's fine too, then this could be a very challenging tool. And Demetrius said something very specific in there that I keyed into. You better get a running list of your debt,
Yes.
because you should be able to click on your phone somewhere and suddenly it lists all the debts, outstanding debts, how long it'll take you to pay them off, maybe even how that compares to the total amount of money in your checking account. Whatever it is, that's coming. If that doesn't exist, that's coming, because I could see something like that being mandated to make sure that
Yeah.
people understand, like, oh, I didn't realize I bought like 25 things in the last year and I haven't paid any of them off yet.
Well, what's interesting is Google Pay will actually track it for you. And I
Oh,
imagine
nice.
Apple, if they're not doing it, they probably will. They actually have a track orders and shipments, which is pretty similar to what Shopify and Amazon do, where if you buy something on a website
Uh-huh.
and you use Apple Pay for it, then you can go and see, okay, what's the status on that? Has it shipped? If it's shipped, here's my tracking, and I can see where it is. Shopify has a shop app, which does the same thing, and it's great. I love it. So Google will track, all right, here are all your subscriptions that you're paying for through Google Pay. I imagine Apple will do the same, and ideally it would include things like the pay later would track that to make sure that you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, I highly recommend, if you're whatever extent you're engaging in anything that involves payments, whether it's subscriptions for your Netflix or your car payment, or if you're using Klarna or Affirm to buy anything, furniture or a new pool or whatever it happens to be,
Uh-huh.
then get it into some kind of tracking software, even if it's just like an Excel workbook or something like that. Just like have
Exactly.
visibility on it, track how it's coming down. Make sure when you're making decisions that you know how much debt you're adding to your balance book.
100%. So let's shift to the next one here, which is improved visual lookup lets you pull a photo subject out of the background.
So I think everybody's kind of wanted this. I mean, Photoshop, I believe, has something like this, but the user experience for this on iOS 16 is really compelling. This is the one thing that I looked at and I was like, I am not aware of any other service that lets you do this, especially on a mobile device, where you can just take a picture of your dog, your kids, your friends, whatever it happens to be, and just drag and drop that person
Uh-huh.
out of the photo like an isolated white, and you could drop it into something else. Obviously, for college kids, this can lead to a lot of shenanigans,
Sure.
but it's a great user experience, and I've wanted this for so long, so long. Where I'm like, all right, I want this, but I want a photo of this thing, but I don't necessarily want all the background. Let's try to get like one of those white box studio whatever they sell with the
Uh-huh.
lighting, and so I can get a picture of this thing in an isolated white, and now you can just drag and drop it.
How many like how many like dating sites are going to now have photos uploaded where the person's got their arm wrapped around nobody?
Oh man. Oh yeah, you can remove like your X from your photos or something like that. If it
Yeah.
was me, I would just go overboard and be like, "Here's me on Mars with no equipment."
Exactly, right. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think there's going to be a lot of creativity that comes out of it. There's also going to be issues like they always have, but like, I think giving people the capability to do all these amazing things, I just think it enables creativity for the most part.
Yeah, I
I
thought
think
this
it's
was
going to
an
be fun.
awesome feature. I think it's great what Apple's doing. I know I'm kind of giving them giving some crap for kind of copying everybody else's ideas, but that's just the way it works. And if you can do that while also providing at least one thing that's new, I think that's a huge win.
Absolutely. The next one on here, before we jump into Elon and Twitter update, is that iPhone as a Mac webcam with continuity camera. This was a very strange one to me, for a couple of reasons, and it's going to sound kind of odd here, but like, so I love the connectivity between your phone and your Mac and your iPad, and how they are just
Mhm.
phenomenal, getting everything to sync really well. I was surprised for Apple that they did this for one reason. It doesn't really look cool. So when the phone's hanging over your MacBook, my initial thought in my stomach was is like that's so out of character for Apple to just like be like, oh, we're
Yeah,
gonna hang this thing on our MacBook. Now, when I saw what you're able to do, I thought, oh my gosh, Dee and I could do this for research. Like there's some pretty cool
oh, yeah.
options here for conducting research. Um, but visually, it's kind of not what they normally do. Normally, they would say, look at this webcam we created. It's the world's greatest webcam. It works seamlessly on every Apple machine. It does
No, I
20
thought
25 different things. And they didn't. They went a different direction.
they went an awesome direction because they're doing something that nobody else can do right now. People are already using their iPhones as webcams and things, but they're having to jump through a bunch of hoops to do it.
Correct.
And basically, what you're where you are right now is that what in general webcams kind of suck. Like they get the job done, but you're talking about a $100 $200 camera that you're using all the time, and most people
Yeah.
aren't going to spend. I mean, people are out there; they are spending couple $1,000 for a DSLR or a mirrorless camera and using that as a webcam. But there's definitely like a bunch of hoops to go through. Canon released something where you can just use a web utility or a desktop utility in order to use your Canon camera as a webcam.
Hmm.
But it's a pain. And the reality is there is not going to be a actual just USB plug and play webcam that is going to be as good as a modern smartphone camera. It's just not. There people are not paying that kind of money.
Yeah.
So for this to be done, and you can access a lot of the features, you can access things like portrait mode and the other things that the iPhone can do, and use it as your webcam. It's gonna be a better webcam than on like a Logitech webcam, like a Logitech Brio or something like that, which I think might be the top of the line.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's also leveraging a device you already have. It adds value to your iPhone. It adds value to your Mac. You can use this awesome feature where you can have a simultaneous. You can have it looking at you, facing you, and show your face on the webcam, but also use the ultra wide to get your desktop or your desk, literal desktop, not your computer desktop, but your
Yeah.
actual downward facing camera, so you can see what your hands are doing. And there are a ton of hobbyists out there, ton of YouTubers, a ton of streamers who will use stuff like that. Anybody who's into like custom keyboards or
Ah.
does mouse reviews or does like Warhammer figurines or any of that kind of stuff. You imagine any kind of within our industry, any kind of a like an industrial designer who's working on a handheld product, they can show you. We can get a call on with a like industrial design buddy of ours who might live somewhere else, and they can show us the foam core and they can show us the form factor with a downward facing camera using their phone. It's going to be higher resolution than pretty much anything that you can buy that costs less than probably $1,000.
Well, that's the thing is when I saw that and I was saying like, ooh, we can use this for research. that's what was my
Mhm.
thought. It was like, I was like, imagine a client being on the other side, or not even a client, a user on the other side who has this capability. And they're like,
Mhm.
okay, I see what you guys are building. Like, let's talk. And then we get that dual video like that. And it's like easy to
Mhm.
do and that kind of stuff. I thought it was game changing. I just, when they connected it and they hung it there, I was just like, oh, that's kind of out of character. Do you know what I mean? Like they
Mhm.
typically would have said like, oh, see, you could barely even see it. It's integrated into the bezel or something, right? It just,
Yeah.
it solved a problem, a big
I,
problem, added a ton of functionality, but visually it just felt out of character for Apple. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm going to use
sure.
it. I'm going to use it.
Which is I like that they did it because honestly I feel like sometimes kind of the fashion brandness of Apple holds them
Yeah.
back, and I'm just like, you know what? Who cares if it doesn't look great? Figure that out over time.
Yeah.
But you have something that so many people can use. Imagine your son doing artwork, like drawing or something, while he has a camera. He also has his camera on his face while he's talking to his grandmother, so she
Yeah.
can see and talk to him about the drawings that he's doing. Like there's so many things you can do with this, and I'm glad they didn't let the aesthetics of it hold them back.
Yeah. No, that it was cool. I thought it was a good update. Like I felt like there was a lot of cool things that went in there, things I'm excited about on iOS
Yeah,
16. I definitely have to upgrade my laptop soon. So, seeing that they have ports back. Thank you, Apple. I appreciate you giving me ports because guess what? I do lots of different things and I need ports. Um,
yeah. I feel like Apple gets a little bit of a pass, and everybody's so excited for doing something that they should have done years and years ago, especially when it comes to the ports and the keyboard issue that was and the touch bar. And we
Mhm.
didn't even talk about the MacBook 13-inch that's getting the non-Pro, that's getting the M2, but it still has the old design. Like, why, Apple? Just stop. Just nobody wants the old design. I don't know.
Well,
I keep
I,
trying to make it happen, but nobody wants it.
I will say this is that I don't think they got away with the whole missing ports thing. If you look at the comments under any public release of a MacBook that didn't have ports in it, what were some of the biggest flows of comments coming through? Where's this? Why did you get rid of this port?
Hmm.
We need those things. We use it for this. We use it for that. Right. So they got quite a bit of pushback from their users for too long,
Yeah,
honestly, a couple of years at least. And then they eventually said, yep, okay, this is what you guys need. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what we need. I absolutely love your machines. But if I can't plug anything into it,
yeah.
I'm
It's a
kind of
great
stuck.
example of kind of the aesthetics kind of hurting the product, and
Yep.
it's the same thing that I've been saying about like the thinness. Like I don't care how thin my laptop is, to be honest. Like I care about my phone, how thin that is, because it goes in my pocket.
Yeah.
But my laptop doesn't go in my pocket. It's fine. I have a bag for it.
Yeah. No, it's true.
It's it's all fine. The reality that they're now kind of rebalancing aesthetics versus functionality, I think is a big win for the company. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I'm also thinking about that if we're doing kind of the comparison game, even though it's not yet a product, the Google presentation with the live translation on those AR glasses, that keeps me up at night. I'm so excited for that. I think that is potentially society changing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the first time, and it might have been at a Google presentation when they were showing this occur in real time. Both they were trying to do with audio, right? And then now they're doing it
Hmm.
visually and stuff. You're doing something that I give them credit for because it's really challenging. Okay,
Hmm.
it's a very difficult problem to solve. And in addition to that, you're actually opening up the world because of it. So it's a very cool direction, and I hope we get to a point where it's just that seamless, like
Hmm.
literally that seamless that we go to another country and there's no anxiety related to language barriers, and we're not sitting there
Yeah.
looking at a book trying to say words, but we can actually like quickly integrate within that society and educate one another and that kind of stuff. So I think it's on the right track. But one final thought on the whole thing is that, as I've always said, and I really feel like this is happening more and more as we're getting closer and closer to, I don't know, this full integration of people's lives with technology, is that we're seeing that everything is converging. Like it's getting almost harder and harder for these companies to truly compete because
Hmm.
they're doing the same things, which is great. I mean, like meaning like you can buy yourself, an iPhone, or you can buy yourself an Android phone, and the capabilities are the same. This is the same. That's the same. Everything feels very similar. All the things that you need to get done, and you're just having to choose your ecosystem. And I think
Yeah.
that's a good place to be, because you don't want to feel like, oh, I chose an Android phone, so I'm left out of this thing that iOS has, or iOS has gotten rid of so many things that I'm jealous of everybody on Android that can do X, Y, and Z. They should be very similar in that sense, and you should just
Yeah.
pick your ecosystem. And I think they are getting
Yeah.
very similar.
I'm hoping, as you pointed out, that the M2 is a sign of them getting back to kind of the deep tech innovation that they used to do with
Yeah.
that brought us the original Macintosh or the iMac or I guess not as much the iMac, but the iPhone and the iPod were absolutely, those were things that really shifted everything for everybody. And I hope they get back to that.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's talk about our second and final topic. It's more of an update than it is like a deep discussion, but we've been kind of digging into the Elon stuff and the Twitter and the Twitter purchase and kind of what's unfolding with that. And like I said, in the very beginning, I feel like we're going to be hearing this mini series is going to be coming out soon about what happens after this whole thing ends. I think ultimately, even with all the stuff that you're about to update everybody on, D, ultimately it's Elon wanting to walk away from this deal. And I've said that a couple of times. I just feel like he's not into it anymore, and he's stuck.
Yeah. I don't know that he was ever that into it, but it got attention for sure.
Like an emotional decision.
So, yeah, a lot has happened since we last talked about this. We figured we'd let everybody kind of get caught up on the product. We let a bit of things happen before we go back to it. Otherwise, we would just be like this running topic that we address every week, and we didn't want it to become that. But enough has happened that we're like, all right, now we should probably talk about this a little bit. Because I imagine there's gonna be a third film in this trilogy. Because things are starting to get a little Tiger King. So anyway, as we predicted, Elon got some cold feet. Like I think we gave it what, like a, even after the announcement that they had reached an agreement on terms, I think we gave it like 60-40 chance that this was actually going to happen. So since since they did come to agreement on terms, and the last time we talked about it, Elon started questioning the validity of the bot numbers on Twitter, saying that he was pausing the deal despite waiving due diligence during the negotiations. Now he wants to do some due diligence, and I don't really know why. He would want, why the bot numbers really matter that much. Maybe he's looking at like user counts. Uh, but it's a weird place, and I also kind of question, like, well, isn't removing bots, wouldn't that count as violating free speech for him, since they're represented the speech of somebody? But also since that time, because this is a whole tapestry of stuff going on, uh, Twitter stock price dropped below $40, which is well before the $50 to $4 a share price that he was setting the acquisition value for the company. So now he would be paying way more than the company is worth, up to what I think 25% more than the actual value of the company. At the same time, Tesla's stock dropped roughly 40% from its April value when all these negotiations started. So at one point it was at $1,100 a share, and it dropped at one point below 600 or below 700, down to like 650 or so. I think it's back up to 700% or over $700 a share, but it's still like 40% in value, and it caused Elon to lose 50% of, or $50 billion in net worth. So this puts a lot of things into question. There are a few reasons why that happened. There was the accusation of sexual harassment and an associated cover up, which oddly I don't think I ever heard a like clear denial from Elon. He said something about it being weird, if it would be weird if I was doing this, if this was the first time that anybody heard about it, which is not a denial. It almost sounds like it could be taken as like bragging about how efficient his cover up process is. Um,
I
then there were
think he
reports of,
did. I think he did deny it on an interview or something, but I didn't follow that super closely.
yeah, the fact that we're both like, I assume he denied it. I never heard him deny it. We've been following the study and have looked up multiple news articles, and I haven't been able to find it. Um, which is, I don't know, it brings up a lot of questions. There are also some reports of safety issues with Tesla cars. locking the doors when they catch on fire. So, and then you have to go through some kind of weird, like, in like the baseboards of the car door to try to find a manual release because the electronic releases will stop working. So that was a little strange. This is probably something that's been going on for a while, but just kind of got new life because of all the different Elon stories. And then to cap it off, he announced a 10% layoff of salaried employees, which brings up questions about growth of the company. Which I look at it and say, okay, well, a lot of the value of this stock is based on anticipated growth. So they're looking at it and saying, all right, well, we think that that Tesla will eventually be worth so much more than it is now based on the revenue. So it's assuming roughly, I think, a 900% increase in revenue in order for the stock to be worth its value at $700 a share. And now, if you're saying, okay, we're not growing, so we need to lay off, then it really might be more like $150 stock if you're valuing it based on revenue today. And kind of looking at the the supply chain issues, especially around chips and silicon, then it looks like they might not be able to increase their productivity for a while now. So those are all questions. But the Tesla stock drop brings up questions about his ability to finance the deal because of the drop in net worth and the change in kind of the value of the stock and what kind of financing he can get against the loan amount, like a loan amount against his equity. And it could be the point where, because he's already taken out a bunch of loans against the value of his equity and then it dropped, that his creditors could be looking to refinance that or call in his loans or whatever it could happen to be.
It's actually quite complicated, how they're kind of trying to work this stuff out because he's kind of locked into this contract. There's not a lot
Yeah.
of ways for him to wiggle out of it, and if he wiggles out of the one with the banks, I think he owes them quite a bit of money. I think it's at least a couple $1 billion, right?
Okay, so in the middle of all this, and this is where things start to get kind of into the bizarre, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, announced he was launching an investigation into Twitter's bot situation. He was using some Texas based law about like consumer protections or something like that. Um, and it's not entirely clear how Twitter bots necessarily play into protecting Texas consumers. But for context, this Attorney General, Ken Paxton, has been indicted for fraud and is awaiting trial for multiple counts of alleged fraud.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
and there's several whistleblowers, and it's a really weird situation. It's incredibly odd that Ken Paxton is still the Attorney General after he's been indicted something like weirdly like 7 years ago, and then for some reason he's not actually gone to trial yet. But it brings up these questions of like an undue influence, considering that Elon Musk supposedly moved to Texas a few
Hmm.
years back, and if there's absolutely questions as whether or not there was some kind of quid pro quo between Ken Paxton and Elon Musk in order to lean on Twitter, and if there was, then that's now we're getting into actual criminal charges possibility, like actual crimes going on. So this is very, very strange at that point. Like I would be surprised that someone would decide to get it aligned in that way in order to get what they want.
Yeah, this seems like a nowhere burger, It's like this is not going to go anywhere, and all it's doing is taking up resources that they can be using towards like real things that need to be addressed in Texas, right?
Well, a Twitter bot situation, I mean, an investigation that would take years. I mean, that
I
would
know.
be well beyond, it would be the kind of thing where, okay, well, now Elon has been, they can try, probably end up trying to extend it out for an extended period of time, but the civil court won't necessarily take the recommendations of a criminal investigation into the bot count because there's a fundamental question to the extent that the bot count actually matters, and how much it differentiation and like where that like the difference between the reported count versus the actual count,
Hmm.
and where that actually hits a threshold where it matters, or if it matters at all. It just seems like grasping at straws.
Yeah, I wonder, and this is not something that I have done, but if you look at the contract that he signed, to purchase Twitter, is there anything there that says like if the company is having troubles, under investigation, anything like that, that he has the right to walk away? Because it seems to me like very strange timing, first of all. And second of all, it's like, he's in Texas now, and now he's a Texan, and everybody kind of seems to be, wanting to befriend him and stuff. And it's like, this to me just seems like a weird coincidence. And I am sure they're going to investigate this, but like, is this just another way of trying to wiggle his way out of the deal, you think?
It certainly seems like it. I can't imagine that Ken Paxton would just launch this investigation into Twitter's bots, of all things,
Hmm.
especially when the main thrust of Republicans' criticism of Twitter has nothing to do with bots, and it's more to do with overzealous regulation. They actually passed a law
Hmm.
that would have made removing bots illegal on the platform because they said that you couldn't moderate. It would force them not to moderate. So now they're saying that, well, maybe they haven't done enough moderation, even though we passed a law that prevents them from doing this moderation. So it's I can't imagine Ken Paxton would launch this investigation, especially without at least running it by Elon and making sure he wasn't making things worse for him.
This thing. I feel like he Elon definitely needs to get away from this. Number one. Number two
Mm-hmm.
is, who has the worst CEO job in Silicon Valley right now? The CEO of Twitter. Like, this sounds like such a terrible day-to-day situation to have to be dealing with,
Yeah.
And in addition to that, the most recent news was, Elon for a while has been saying that Twitter's not giving them access to the whole data stream, and that he can't basically have this deal go forward if he's not going to get access to all the data to find out how many bots there are, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
do at least do an analysis to try to determine how many bots there are. Well, as of yesterday, Twitter is now offering him access to the entire data stream so he can review it. He can no longer claim they're holding back. They're basically saying, here you go, here's full access. So, with that, his only option is to do his analysis, study the data stream, and determine whether or not, this is worth it for him. But it doesn't even matter if it's worth it, because the offer has already been accepted. And I think they're going to take him to court and try to force him to purchase it, which I find it hard to. How do you force someone to spend, whatever,
Well, you don't necessarily
$45 billion?
force them. I mean, when you take them to court, you're not necessarily forcing them to purchase it. You're asking for damages for him breaching a contract. It's a breach of contract.
Yeah.
So the ways out are they renegotiate in order to purchase Twitter at a lower price, at a price that still, but a price that still makes sense to stockholders.
Hmm.
But barring that, if there is, and that would be an out of court settlement. If there is an actual court judgment, it's for damages for breach of contract.
Well, I mean, Twitter could look at this and say, okay, sure, give us $5 billion and you can walk away from it. And then they just
Yeah,
made $5 billion for doing no work at all.
yeah, they just have to pay their lawyers.
They just have to pay
So
the lawyers. Yeah.
it could get caught up in the whole court trial process for a long period of time. But if you are a Tesla employee, a SpaceX employee, or a stockholder at either of those, I'd be looking at, especially if I'm a Tesla employee, the stock is maybe topped out relative to what it's going to be for a period of time going forward, considering all of these things, all these distractions going on with your part-time CEO, and it's probably not going to get better. It feels like we're in the third act of Wolf of Wall Street as far as
Yeah.
Elon's behavior. So if it's not this, if the Twitter thing gets figured out, he'll probably find something else to jump into and create some massive distraction against versus running his company. And it's at a time where all of this competition is jumping in. So if I was a Tesla employee sitting on a bunch of RSUs, I might think about cashing out.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it just depends on how you feel about things in regard to technology and competition, and whether or not you're looking at this from a micro standpoint, or you're actually going to a 30,000 foot view and you're saying, okay, this is an issue that's happening right now, but a year from now, maybe we're behind this,
Mm-hmm.
and it really depends. I mean, I heard, or I read, I don't remember where I heard this, but it was like, that during the all hands meeting at Tesla or something, somebody asked him a question about all of the kind of chaos going on regarding this Twitter purchase, and he said, "Don't worry about it, just ignore it," or something. And I think ultimately what he's getting at is this: I have to resolve this basically, or everything becomes a house of cards for all the companies he runs.
You look at what is on Elon's plate, right? So he's got
Yeah.
Tesla, he's got SpaceX, he's got the Boring Company, he's got Hyperloops. I'm sure he has other stuff going on. Now he's trying to buy Twitter, and he's trying to get out of buying Twitter, and he's dealing with the sexual abuse allegations and or allegation, uh, and then whatever else is going to come along. So if I were to make a prediction about where this is going,
Yeah, do it.
I think eventually Twitter and Elon will find some kind of settlement. I don't think he's going to end up buying Twitter because it's going to be too much of a pain in the ass. I don't think he was ever really that interested in buying Twitter. I think he was really interested in finding a way to boost his Twitter stock so that he can cash out and make some money. He's going to find out a way out of it. He's going to pay some amount. It might be, a few $100 million. Maybe they'll say like, okay, well, you pay this, we'll negotiate you on your exit clause and we won't ask for additional damages and we'll let you out. And then he'll go on and find some new rabbit hole to dive down and
Yeah.
some new thing where he'll say like, oh, he's going to buy Apple. And people will say, that's ridiculous. You don't even have enough money. He says, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And it's going to become a
Yeah.
whole issue.
Yeah. My prediction is from the 30,000 foot view, I believe this is a moment in time. I think that the Texas AG will drop the case, obviously. I think that Twitter and Elon will part ways, and Elon will have to write them a very big check to do so. I think that he's going to go kind of off on Twitter for a while, and then he'll get back on it and continue to use it like normal. He'll focus on Tesla for a few years and get it straightened out. And then I think they'll bring in a new CEO to run Tesla, and he'll focus on SpaceX.
Well, you are much more, I think, optimistic about this than I am. I think that he will. We're at the point in his. I just see a behavior where he just kind of lurches from catastrophe to catastrophe at this point.
Well, I just feel like when you're in chaos and stress, you tend to go back to your North Star at some point, the thing that actually mattered to you most. And I feel like for him, I've watched a ton of interviews pre this Twitter saga and some of the other issues, and all of them were centrally connected to his passion for SpaceX and his passion to create the Tesla. And I feel like the Tesla vehicle, and he already created the Tesla vehicle and now he's just scaling it, but he hasn't really achieved all his goals on SpaceX. And he'll go back to his North Star, which is I just want to like dig into this for a while and then we'll see what happens after that. So it's slightly more optimistic,
Yeah,
but I also want to be slightly optimistic because I feel like we're living in a world right now where there's just a lot of nasty stuff going on and
yeah,
everyone's just trying to be sane. So I'm hopefully putting some positive energy into the universe.
okay, yeah, we'll see. I feel like what you're saying is eminently reasonable, and it would be a very reasonable take if we were talking about a very reasonable person.
That's true. Good point. And with that said, this is a great time to wrap. All right. Thanks, Steve, for everything. And thanks, everyone, so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. We'll be posting links to many of the sources that we referenced on Twitter. So you can find us and follow us on Twitter at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast number one. If you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. Thanks, everyone. And we will see you all next week.